The morning of my nursing school pinning ceremony, I stood in the hospital parking lot in my white uniform, pinning the little gold lamp to my collar by myself, using the side mirror of someone else's car because I didn't have anyone there to help me. 2 blocks away, in the ballroom of the Marriott my parents had rented for the weekend, my younger brother was getting a brand new Land Rover Defender for his high school graduation gift, burgundy. Leather interior. A red bow the size of a small child strapped to the hood. My mother was crying in the way she only ever cried for him. My father was clapping him on the back, that broad, proud clap I had seen 1,000 times, but never once felt directed at me. I knew all of this because my aunt had texted me a photo by accident. She meant to send it to the family group chat. She sent it to me instead, a solo thread, just the two of us. The message underneath the photo said, "He looks so happy. Your parents really outdid themselves." I stood in that parking lot and looked at the photo for a long time. Then I put my phone in my pocket, walked through the glass doors of the hospital, and went to become a registered nurse. That was 4 years ago. What happened after is the reason I'm telling you this now. Growing up in our house in Columbus, Ohio was like being a background character in someone else's movie. My brother was the star. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I said it that way for a long time, and it used to taste like something rotten in my mouth. But now it's just the truth. He was 6 years younger than me, charming in the way that makes people want to stand close to him, and my parents had loved him with a completeness they never quite found for me. My father sold insurance. My mother taught elementary school part-time and considered her real work to be raising my brother, managing his travel baseball schedule, his tutoring sessions, his social life. She was good at it. She was genuinely good at it. When he made the all-state team at 15, she cried so hard her mascara ran all the way down to her jaw. She framed the newspaper clipping and hung it in the hallway, right across from the front door, so it was the first thing anyone saw when they walked in. My accomplishments lived in a drawer somewhere. I don't mean that as a metaphor. I genuinely believe if you went to my childhood home right now and opened the junk drawer in the kitchen, you'd find my 8th grade academic achievement certificate still in the envelope from the school. My father wasn't cruel about it. He wasn't the kind of man who sat you down and explained that your sister matters more. He just had a way of redirecting. I'd come home excited about something, a grade, an acceptance, a scholarship application, and he'd listen for about 30 seconds with this expression that wasn't quite interest and wasn't quite dismissal, somewhere in between. Then he'd say something like, "That's great, sweetheart," and find a reason to walk into the other room. That was the whole interaction. That was the entirety of his investment. I decided I wanted to go into nursing when I was 16. A woman in our church had a daughter who was a traveling nurse, and she came to speak to our youth group one Sunday, and something about the way she described her work, the problem solving, the human contact, the real-time urgency of it, grabbed me somewhere deep. I went home and told my parents at dinner. My mother said, "Nursing is a lot of hard work." My father said, "You'd be on your feet all day." My brother, who was 10 and eating a bowl of cereal for dinner because my mother indulged this, didn't look up. That was the conversation. No one asked me why I wanted it. No one asked what kind of nurse. No one said, "We'll support you however we can." They moved on to discussing whether my brother's coach was playing him enough in left field, and I excused myself to do the dishes. I got into Ohio State's nursing program. It was competitive. I was proud. I told my parents on a Thursday night after dinner. My mother said that was wonderful and immediately pivoted to asking my father whether he'd called the camp coordinator back about my brother's summer spot. I waited for something else to come. It didn't. The next 4 years were a controlled demolition of any remaining fantasy I'd had about being valued by my family. I worked 3 part-time jobs to fill in the gaps my academic scholarship didn't cover. A coffee shop on weekday mornings, a home goods store on weekends, and weekend overnight shifts at an urgent care clinic that let me actually practice patient check-in and vitals. The nursing program itself was brutal. The coursework was relentless. clinical hours on top of classes, skills checkoffs, pharmacology exams, care plan documentation that took entire evenings. My parents sent $200 a month. It covered my portion of utilities and not much else. I knew because my aunt had let it slip once over Thanksgiving that they had set up a savings account for my brother's college fund when he was born. I was 17 when I found this out. I had never had a savings account opened in my name for anything. I didn't mention it. I had learned early that mentioning things like this produced one of two results: either a conversation about how hard my parents worked and how much they gave, or a conversation about how my brother's needs were just different. Neither conversation left me feeling anything except tired. My clinical rotations were where I started to understand what I was built for. I had a supervising nurse at Nationwide Children's during my pediatric rotation. A woman in her 50s with short gray hair and an efficiency about her that I admired immediately. She pulled me aside after my second week and told me I had good instincts and that I needed to trust them faster. It was the most direct professional feedback I had ever received in my life, and I almost cried in the supply room afterward because I hadn't realized how much I needed someone to see me working and say, "Yes, this is real, you're doing this right." The night before the pinning ceremony, I called home. I told my mother the ceremony was at 2 in the afternoon the next day, that it was at the hospital where I'd done my final rotation, that it would mean a lot to me if they could come. She said, "Oh, honey, I thought we told you. We're doing the big reveal for your brother's graduation present this weekend. We've been planning it for months. You know how he is about cars." I sat on the edge of my bed in the apartment I shared with two other nursing students and tried to locate a response somewhere inside myself. "Cars," I said. "The Land Rover," she said cheerfully. "He's had his eye on it since last fall. Your dad pulled a lot of strings to get the delivery scheduled this weekend. It's a whole thing." I thought about the scholarship letters I had written, the clinical hours I had logged, the pharmacology final I had almost failed and then didn't. I thought about the $200 a month and the junk drawer in the camp coordinator and the newspaper clipping in the hallway. "Okay," I said. And then, because I was 24 and still trying, I said, "Would you maybe be able to come for just part of it? The actual pinning part is only about 45 minutes. There was a pause. I could hear my brother's music in the background. "Sweetie," she said, in that voice, the soft one, the one that was supposed to feel like a cushion but always landed like a door closing, "you know how important this is to him. You're so independent. You'll be wonderful up there. Take lots of pictures." A short pause. "We're really proud of you." The line wasn't dead yet when I put the phone down. I got to the ceremony early. I sat in the third row. When they read my name and I walked to the front and received my pin from the program director, there were people in the audience applauding. Strangers, the families of my classmates, a few of them cheered. I smiled and I meant it because I had done something real, and the room knew it even if my family was 40 minutes away watching a bow get taken off an SUV. I took a picture of myself in the parking lot afterward and texted it to my aunt, who had sent me the accidental photo that morning. She texted back 6 heart emojis, and "I am so proud of you. That was the best part of the day." I moved to Pittsburgh 6 weeks after graduation. Travel nursing. I had researched the contracts for months, the stipends, the tax-free housing allowances, the compensation structure. A 13-week ICU contract in Pittsburgh was paying more than most staff nurses in Columbus made in 6 months. I signed it without telling my parents until after. The first assignment was hard in the way I hadn't been prepared for. ICU nursing is a different discipline than anything in school. The patients are sicker. The margin for error is smaller. I made mistakes, small ones, caught and corrected ones, and each one felt enormous. I cried in my car twice in that first month, but I also started to understand the rhythm of it, the particular vocabulary of critical care, how to read a ventilator, how to prioritize when everything feels equally urgent. By week 8, I had found my footing. By the end of the contract, I had been asked to extend. I took a second contract in Austin, a third in Denver, a fourth back in Pittsburgh because I had made friends there, which I hadn't expected, and the pay for ICU travel nurses was still strong. By the time I was 28, I had paid off every dollar of my student loans. I had a robust emergency fund. I had started contributing to a Roth IRA at 26 and had been maxing it out since. A financial planner I found through a nurses forum online had helped me build a conservative investment strategy. I wasn't wealthy, but I was stable in a way that felt new and structural, not fragile. I was also largely alone in the ways that mattered. Not friendless, the travel nursing community was tighter than I had expected, and I had people I could call. But I had no family in the traditional sense. My brother and I exchanged birthday texts, sometimes. My parents would occasionally forward me news articles about things they thought I'd find interesting, which I found mostly baffling. The gap had grown into something permanent without anyone ever deciding to make it permanent. It had just gone that way. The inflection point came during my contract in Denver. I was nearing the end of a stretch of night shifts, running on 4 hours of sleep and a gas station coffee, when my manager pulled me aside and told me the hospital wanted to bring me on as a preceptor for their new graduate nurses. They wanted someone who could run orientees through the ICU rotation, essentially a paid educator role on top of my clinical hours. It was a significant offer. More money, more responsibility, a title change. I thought about it for exactly one day and said yes. Something about teaching clicked for me the way clinical work had clicked, but differently. Teaching required me to articulate things I had always done intuitively, to find the words for the logic I used at a bedside. I discovered I was good at it. The new graduates responded to me. I was organized without being rigid, and I had made enough mistakes of my own that I didn't perform infallibility. My first orientee told me about 6 weeks in that I was the first preceptor who had made her feel like it was okay to not know something yet. I stayed in Denver for 2 years. During that time, the idea formed slowly, the way most real ideas do, not as a sudden moment, but as a gradual accumulation of evidence. I was watching new nurses graduate and struggle with the same things I had struggled with, and I was also watching experienced nurses burn out in their 30s and 40s because no one had given them the tools to manage the emotional weight of the job. The healthcare system was not built to support its own workers. Everyone knew this. Very few people were doing anything about it at the level where it could actually reach individual nurses. I started writing things down. Not a business plan at first, just observations, what I would have wanted when I was 24 and crying in my car. What resources actually helped? What kind of mentorship had made a difference for me and why? I started a private blog that I shared with exactly 4 people, then 8, then 15. The feedback was immediate and intense. Nurses were hungry for this. They were lonely and exhausted in a very specific professional way, and no one was speaking to that directly. The blog became a newsletter. The newsletter became a platform. I built a structured mentorship program for new graduate nurses that matched them with experienced nurses in their specialty, gave them monthly check-in calls, and gave them a private online community where they could ask questions without fear of looking incompetent. I called it Steady Hands. I funded the first year out of my own savings, about $18,000 for the technology infrastructure, the legal setup, the initial outreach. I worked on it at night and on days off. I kept my travel nursing contracts because the income was still necessary and because I was not willing to build something on wishful thinking. I wanted it to work first. I wanted proof of concept. Proof came in the form of a nurse named Zoe, who had been matched with me as her direct mentor through the program. She was a new grad in a Memphis emergency department, overwhelmed and seriously considering leaving the profession entirely by month 3. I spent 3 months working with her weekly. She stayed. She made it to her first year. She sent me a voice memo on her 1-year work anniversary that I have listened to many times since. Her voice, still a little shaky, saying she had just floated to the pediatric ER for the first time, and she hadn't panicked, and she needed me to know that. Steady Hands had its first 100 members by the end of year 1, its first 500 by the end of year 2. By the time I was 31, I'd enrolled over 2,000 nurses, partnered with 3 hospital systems for institutional subscriptions, and was generating enough revenue to pay myself a real salary and bring on 2 part-time staff members. Nursing publications had written about us. A podcast that respected had me on as a guest. A nurse educator conference invited me to keynote. I was at that conference in Charlotte, sitting in the green room 30 minutes before I was supposed to walk out on stage, when my phone rang. My father's name on the screen. It had been 2.5 years since we'd spoken on the phone. We had texted, sparse, functional texts, holiday acknowledgments, a check-in after a news story about a bad storm in Denver. I had expected, without consciously deciding to expect it, that we had arrived at a kind of mutual distance that would simply continue indefinitely. Hearing his name on my screen while I was sitting backstage in a blazer I had bought specifically for this moment felt like something had shifted without my permission. I picked up. "Hey, sweetheart." His voice was the same. That had not changed. "Do you have a minute?" "I have about 25, I said. "I'm about to go on stage." Right, your mother mentioned that." A short pause. "We saw the article in the nursing journal about your program." "Okay," I said. "It's impressive, Celia." He said my name the way he always had, like it was a neutral word, not warm or cold, just a word. "You've built something real there. We're proud of you." The phrase landed the way it always did. A little too late, a little too frictionless, like a card sent after the birthday has already passed. I waited. "Your mother and I were thinking," he said, and here it came. I could hear it organizing itself on the other end of the line. "Your brother is in a tough spot. You know he's been trying to get his sports media thing off the ground. The podcast, the social media presence. He has real talent, we really believe that, but he needs some help with the professional side. Marketing, branding, that sort of thing." I looked at my reflection in the green room mirror, the blazer, the lanyard with my name and the conference logo, the stage diagram on the table in front of me with my name printed in the slot labeled keynote speaker. "What kind of help?" I asked, even though I already understood exactly what kind of help. "Well, you've clearly figured out how to build an audience, how to market something from scratch," he said. "We thought maybe you could sit down with him, give him some guidance, point him in the right direction. You know, maybe connect him with some of the people you've met. Family helps family." There it was, the sentence I could have written for him. "Can I ask you something first?" I said. My voice was steady. The green room was quiet except for a low hum of HVAC. "His Land Rover. What year was that?" "The one you had delivered for his high school graduation." A pause. "What?" "The Land Rover," I repeated. "What year was the delivery? I'm thinking it was May 2019, but I might be off." "Celia, what does that have to do with?" "Do you remember what I was doing that same weekend?" Silence. Not a thinking silence, a caught silence. "My nursing school pinning ceremony," I said. "May 18th, 2019. I called Mom the night before and she told me you couldn't come because of the car delivery. I pinned my own lamp that morning in a hospital parking lot. I paused. I used someone else's car mirror because I was alone." I heard my father breathe. "I was standing in that parking lot," I continued, "and I thought, okay, if this is how it is, then I'll build something without them." And that's what I did. Everything you read about in that article, the program, the 2,000 nurses, the keynote I'm walking out to give in about 20 minutes, all of it came from that parking lot, not from anything you invested in. "Celia, I don't want an apology right now," I said, and I meant it. "I'm not saying this to make you feel bad. I'm saying it so you understand that when you call me to ask me to help my brother, you're calling the person you didn't show up for. You're asking me to share what I built on my own with someone who has had everything handed to him. And I think you should understand what you're asking before you expect an answer." The silence was longer this time. "I have to go on stage," I said. "I'll call you next week." I hung up. I sat for a moment with the phone in my lap. Then I put it face down on the table, stood up, straightened my blazer, and walked out to give my keynote to a room of 800 nurses. The applause when I walked out was the kind that takes you by surprise, louder than you expect, sustained a beat longer than you're prepared for. I stood at the podium and looked out at all those faces and thought about Zoe's voice memo and about the preceptor in Columbus who had told me to trust my instincts faster, and about every overnight shift and parking lot and gas station coffee and car mirror that had led to this specific moment. I did not think about the Land Rover. I called my father the following Tuesday, as I had said I would. He answered on the second ring. I told him I wasn't going to help my brother build his platform. I told him I would be willing to have a conversation with him about it. Just a conversation, not a commitment, if my brother requested it himself, not through our parents. I told him that family meant something to me, but that it had to be a two-way thing, and that for most of my life it had not been. I told him I was willing to try building something different, but that I needed to see effort from his side, not just requests. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I didn't know you felt that way." I almost said, "You never asked." But I had already said the hard thing. I didn't need to say all the things. Nephew stood in my lifted at that. My brother never reached out about his podcast. My parents and I started talking on the phone once or twice a month. Real conversations, not functional ones. My mother asked about my work and actually listened to the answers. It was unfamiliar and occasionally awkward and also, cautiously, something. A year after the conference, Steady Hands partnered with the nursing school in Columbus, my nursing school, to pilot a formal mentorship program for graduating students before they started their first jobs. We assigned every participating graduate a Steady Hands mentor in their specialty 6 weeks before their start date. We gave them a community and a framework and the knowledge that they were not alone in it. I flew to Columbus for the launch. The program director at the school took me on a tour and introduced me to the students in the pilot cohort, and one of them, a young woman who was going into pediatric ICU and was visibly terrified and visibly determined in equal measure, said to me, "I heard you built this because you felt like you had to figure everything out by yourself." "Pretty much," I said. "Does it feel worth it now?" I thought about the parking lot. I thought about the car mirror. I thought about pinning the lamp on my own collar while 20 blocks away. A bow was being untied. "Every single day," I said. And I meant it in the way that only the truth can mean something. Not because it was tidy, but because it was real, and it was mine, and no one had handed it to me. I still think about that car mirror sometimes. The way I had to angle my face just right to see the collar of my uniform. The way my hands were steady even though nothing else felt steady at all. There's a version of that morning where I let it break me. I've thought about her too. The girl who calls home after the ceremony and asks why, who spends months waiting for an acknowledgement that never comes, who shrinks herself down to fit into a family that keeps rearranging the furniture to make her invisible. That version of me exists. I visited her often in my 20s. I just didn't stay. What I've come to understand is that what happened to me, the parking lot, the pinning ceremony, the accidental photo of the bow on the hood, wasn't random. It was the product of a long chain of choices, theirs and mine. My parents chose, consistently and without much apparent conflict, to invest their attention and their belief in my brother. And I chose, just as consistently, to build something that didn't require their belief to stand. Neither of those things happened in a single moment. They accumulated, and the accumulation had consequences that were just as real as any decision made out loud. That's the part no one talks about. People want to frame stories like mine as about revenge, or about proving someone wrong, or about a dramatic turning point where everything shifted. But the truth is quieter and more relentless than that. The truth is that every night shift I worked, every contract I signed, every time I stayed in the ICU when the easier thing would have been to leave, that was the story, not the keynote, not my father's phone call. The story was the accumulation of choices made in ordinary moments when no one was watching and no one was going to congratulate me either way. I think about Zoe when I think about this. She was 3 months into her first nursing job and seriously considering walking away. What kept her wasn't inspiration. It wasn't a speech. It was the slow, consistent work of building her own competence, her own judgment, her own trust in herself, and having someone beside her who told her the truth about how hard it was while refusing to let her believe she couldn't do it. That's what changed things for her. Not a single moment. A practice. That's what I'd want anyone to take from what I've shared. Not that suffering produces success. It doesn't automatically, and pretending otherwise is dishonest. But that the way you respond to being underestimated is a choice you make over and over again in small, unglamorous ways. It requires a kind of integrity that no one can give you, the decision to keep your standards for yourself even when the people who were supposed to set them for you never showed up. It requires thinking clearly about what you actually want and why, not just what would hurt the people who hurt you. And it requires a stubbornness that goes deeper than anger, a willingness to keep working long after the anger is burned off, because the work itself has become the point. My parents are trying now. It's imperfect and occasionally awkward, and I have to make peace with the fact that it will probably always be a little of both. But I know who I am in a way I wouldn't have known if the parking lot had been different. I know what I'm capable of building from nothing. In a windowless room, on borrowed time, with no safety net and no applause. That knowledge is mine. No one handed it to me, and no one can take it back.